Justice Douglas, you've been described as the greatest believer in the strenuous life among men in high office since Theodore Roosevelt. Do you have any upcoming projects, any mountain climbing or long hikes coming up?
Well, no, nothing particular in mind. I do a lot of exercise, outdoor hiking and climbing, although I discover as the years go by that the mountains are getting a bit steeper.
Now, you had polio as an infant, is that right?
When I was very small, yes, and I was 2 or 3 years old, I had it in my legs and I had to learn to walk all over again.
Did you undertake strenuous exercise to strengthen your legs?
Yes, I gradually started hiking and exercising, usually hiking, using the outdoors as a gymnasium, so to speak.
Mr. Justice, there are some who believe that American communists should not have the right of free speech in this country, that to give them this privilege undermines our institutions. I understand you have strong views on that subject.
Well, under our charter, which is the Bill of Rights, the right to freedom of speech is not limited. Under some governments, they have a limitation. The freedom of speech is subject to reasonable regulation by the legislature. But under our First Amendment, there are no qualifications.
Do you consider that freedom of speech is the most important element of our American tradition?
Well, it's the very important part of the mucilage that holds us all together, that allows for the diversity to be expressed, and rather than to build up and ferment and finally explode in some violent way. It allows. It performs pretty much the same function here as it does in Hyde Park in England. Anybody can talk, whether we think he's a crackpot or whether he's the president of the Chamber of Commerce. He has the same right.
You don't think this constitutes any danger to our society or our government?
Probably the biggest danger throughout history is not being able to talk.
You are opposed, however, to unlimited action against the government, aren't you?
Action is quite different because the Bill of Rights doesn't say anything about anything except freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of worship.
Some freedom of speech, however, can be somewhat explosive and incite to action, such as some of the communist freedom of speech.
Well, ideas are pretty dangerous sometimes, and some of them, the good ones, have lived a long time. Witness the teachings of Christ. They're pretty powerful in the world today.
You feel that these are impregnable, then, and we don't have to worry about the assaults and the attacks?
Not as long as debate is unlimited and restricted to discussion rather than to organizing for criminal conduct, yes.
Mr. Justice, police and prosecutors have complained that court decisions are making the job of enforcement more difficult, that the innocent are suffering.
Yes, that's not new. The president of the Bar Association of California made that speech in 1910. The Supreme Court, any court that enforces the Constitution, is enforcing impediments upon police action.
You are considered one of the major champions of individual liberties on the court as opposed to police power.
Well, the Constitution is written in general terms. For example, what is a reasonable search or seizure? You can get into arguments about that. That's the Fourth Amendment. The police problems are concerned primarily the right of search and seizure, the Fourth Amendment, the self-incrimination clause of the Fifth Amendment, right of counsel, the Sixth Amendment. Those are not judge-made. Those are in the Constitution, and they were put in to slow down prosecutors and slow down the police.
They definitely were put in for that purpose. They're not unduly impeded, then, in your opinion?
I don't think so under the free society. Now, in some nations have restricted them, those rights. Franco Spain has restricted them. Russia has restricted them. You can get any search that you want in Russia, whether it's reasonable or unreasonable, any time, hour, day or night. A man's house can be entered by the investigator, just summoning a couple of neighbors and breaking in. But our tradition is different. The man's home is his castle, whether he's an offbeat, whether he's suspected of being a criminal, whether he's a devout or pious man, his house is still his castle, and to get in, you have to have a warrant from a judge.
Some people feel the Supreme Court is much more powerful with relation to the executive and legislative branches than it should be. It is much more powerful now than it has been in the past.
Well, that's an old debate. It goes back to the Constitutional Convention. Alexander Hamilton said that he thought it was the weakest of the three because it had no power to appropriate money, and it had no police power. It had no army, which is true. The only power that the court has is the power of public opinion, the consensus of people to live under a regime of law rather than under some kind of dictatorship.
You feel that the court is not excessively powerful in these days?
Well, the court is in the maelstrom of controversial issues and resolves them one way or the other, but that's always been true, and we probably haven't been as heavily criticized in this century as Marshall was, for example, last century.